New York was once the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak in the United States. But now the city has reached a new milestone in its recovery. No new deaths have been reported for the first time since the 11th of March. The city has seen a huge decline in new cases as well. Most of the state, with the exception of New York City, is set to begin Phase 3 reopening. Nail salons, tanning studios, and dog runs will reopen, while restrictions at social gatherings and indoor dining are being relaxed. The epicenter of the outbreak has shifted south to Florida. It has set a new one-day record of almost 15,300 new infections. If Florida were a country, it would rank fourth in the world after the wider US, Brazil, and India. The spread in Florida is part of a wider rise in infections in as many as 44 US states. The spike includes much of the so-called Sun Belt of southern and western states, including California, Arizona, and Texas. Overall, the number of infections in the US stands at over 3.3 million and rising, with over 135,000 deaths. Simon Marks is in Washington, D.C. He joins us now for more on this. Simon, a stark contrast between New York and much of the Sun Belt states. What can states like Florida learn from New York moving forward?
Well, I mean, they can take it seriously. That's what they can learn, Steve. It's very evident that there has been an enormous gulf between the way in which Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York handled things when COVID-19 was absolutely at its highest point in the city, and the way in which Governor Ron DeSantis has handled things. Initially, by the way, Andrew Cuomo was skeptical about COVID-19. All the way back in March, he was telling New Yorkers not to worry about it. It was just like the flu. But then he very rapidly came to understand just what kind of a threat it posed to his state. Governor DeSantis never seems to have reached that same conclusion. And indeed, over the weekend, as Florida was racking up those record levels of new one-day infections, the Disney theme park was allowed to reopen in Orlando, which is jaw-droppingly staggering if you think about it, because there's no possible way, for example, that New York would ever have allowed something to take place. So the writing is firmly on the wall in Florida and in many of these other states that reopened their economies much too rapidly. Texas, Arizona, Louisiana announcing a face mask requirement now for members of the public when they go outdoors. The governor there and public health officials there conceding that the state relaxed its restrictions much too rapidly. But in places like Florida and Texas, where there is still a tremendous independent spirit among people who don't like being told what to do by their governments, this is going to be a real conundrum going forward as these numbers of infections continue to soar.
Simon, President Trump appears to be shifting the blame for the worsening situation onto the country's leading infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci. What happened? Tell us about this.
Well, I think, Glenda, it was always inevitable that at some point Dr. Anthony Fauci and President Trump were going to part ways. They are not in any sense peas in a pod. Even this morning, President Trump has been retweeting a right-wing talk show host from Los Angeles who says the most outrageous lies are the ones about COVID-19. Everyone is lying. The Centers for Disease Control, the media, Democrats and our doctors rejecting the idea completely that coronavirus poses a real health threat to the United States. Dr. Fauci, of course, doesn't embrace views like that. He's also, over the last few days, indicated that he believes that President Trump is advocating a false narrative, in Dr. Fauci's words, when he says that America's mortality rates are falling. In fact, the point is now moot, because since then, the mortality rates are now rising in the United States. And Dr. Fauci, over the weekend, in an interview with the New York Times, said that you simply can't say that America is winning the battle against COVID-19 because it is evidently losing the battle. That's not the kind of rhetoric Donald Trump espouses, and it's certainly not what he wants to hear from a member of his coronavirus task force. So how much longer Dr. Fauci, who was the subject of a coordinated attack by White House insiders over the course of the last few hours, echoing the president's view that Dr. Fauci has made many mistakes, how long he survives in that coronavirus task force, I think is now a very open question.
Thanks for that explanation there. Simon Marks speaking to us from Washington, D.C.